Everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Latita Smith, and I am president of the Winston-Salem Foundation. Several years ago, the foundation began a process to set grant-making priorities. We spoke with community members, nonprofits, and other stakeholders, analyzed data and trends to assess the biggest challenges facing Forsyth County and our biggest opportunities for impact. From those conversations, we landed on advancing equity in education and building inclusive economies. While that process took place over 3 years ago, everything that I've seen and heard as I've made my way across the community in my first 9 months here has reiterated those assumptions hold true. But one challenge in putting a stake in the ground on equity in education and inclusive economies is the sheer magnitude of those problems. No grant, no matter the size, foundation, no matter how strategic, or coalition, no matter how determined, can in and of itself turn the tide. These are generational challenges that require generational unraveling. But the scale of the problem doesn't make it any less urgent. Inequity in education means there are children living in our community today who simply by virtue of where they live, do not have real access to quality education. The absence of inclusive economies means there are people living in our community today who cannot access the employment or supports required to reasonably sustain their families. For us, part of doing this work with persistence and with urgency is getting to the root of what got us here so we can begin to see our way out. We are so honored to work with Triad Cultural Arts to create Rooted in Race, a history of racial segregation and student assignment in the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School District. It helps us to provide context for the current disparities in education access and outcomes we see across our community. And it shows how the decisions we make today, from who sits on our school board, which students get access to which school buildings and which academic programs, how our children are evaluated, the codes by which their conduct is assessed, all have the power to dismantle or reinforce those inequities. As big as the problem is, there are powerful levers within our grasp. In this evening's Ideas in Action Forum, we're looking forward to examining with you those critical opportunities before us. While this forum is part of a 3-part series designed by our Women's Fund to move our community to take action on systemic issues impacting women and girls, particularly women and girls of color, today's event was designed by volunteers from all 3 of the Foundation's strategic initiatives. If you have not heard of the work of the Women's Fund, the Black Philanthropy Initiative, or our Youth Grantmakers in Action, I encourage you to visit the links staff are putting in the chat after the event to learn more. Each have their own unique missions and grant-making programs that support the Foundation's overall vision. And all 3 have placed significant importance on advancing equity in education in their own ways. After experiencing the Rooted in Race exhibit, you'll have an opportunity to hear a student perspective on equity in education from one of our youth grant makers in action. She will be followed by presentations from the Bridges Collaborative and our local school district on work that is currently being done on school choice and equity and where we as a community can help move this work forward. There will be a brief period for Q&A, and then I'd invite you to stay for deeper discussions in breakout rooms before we close for the evening. It is now my pleasure to introduce Anita Justice, who played a significant role in developing the Rooted in Race exhibit. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Triad Cultural Arts, thank you, Winston-Salem Foundation, for the opportunity to provide an overview of the project. Along the skyline in our collage, we see a group of ladies They are the Atkins High School Letter Girls. Mayor Pro Tem Dee Dee Adams provided insight that many Negro schools like Atkins and Carver didn't have cheerleaders. They had letter girls. So here are the letter girls welcoming you to Rooted in Race, a community's journey to school integration. We offer a few comments just to note that we understand that it's not a conclusive study. However, it is an opportunity to have insight into Winston-Salem's desegregation and integration efforts, and it also allows for the acknowledgement of the sacrifices and perseverance of trailblazers, both past and present. One may choose a journey and go directly to community voices, the most powerful point with this project, or scroll along the timeline. We do invite you to consider the words of Isabel Wilkerson in her book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. Many people may rightly say, I had nothing to do with how this all started. I have nothing to do with the sins of the past. My ancestors never attacked Indigenous people, never owned slaves. We are the heirs to whatever is right or wrong with it. We did not erect the uneven pillars or joist, but they are ours to deal with now. Let's go back in time. Each decade begins with a collage, and the decades include legislation, litigation, and a glimpse into the trailblazers during that era. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my little thing to scroll here. So we begin with the family picture. The picture was chosen to emphasize family. The cases were brought forth because it's families that sought better education and hope for better opportunities for their children. This hope, of course, is on the backdrop of knowing that Negro schools were not properly funded. They were substandard in terms of the materials, the resources in general, and historically, thousands upon thousands of dollars for those Negro schools were spent to build white schools and to hire teachers for those schools. This is the Brown, Topeka, Kansas legislation. We honor Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP. The Brown decision is in two phases. Brown 1 struck down Plessy versus Ferguson, that doctrine of separate but equal. So state-sanctioned segregated public schools were unconstitutional because it went against the 14th Amendment. And Brown 2 advised the necessity to dismantle segregated facilities with deliberate speed. And we wondered, what was North Carolina's response? We can say forthright that it was not with deliberate speed. It could best be described as a consistently calculated effort to resist the decision to desegregate schools. We know a lot about it because we were able to find one of the brochures, and it tells us that the goal was to make sure that there was no unacceptable. And when asked, will my child have to sit with students of another race? The answer was emphatically no. This parasol plan was quite damaging. It had 6 laws. It amended the North Carolina Constitution. It enabled private tuition grants for those parents who did not want their students to attend school with others. This, along with a pupil assignment plan, delayed desegregation efforts for approximately 10 years or so. 1957 begins the nation's awakening to the first Negro media stories. For example, there was a Little Rock 9 Arkansas story, that Central High School that many will remember from television reports. And in Winston-Salem, our media sensation was Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn attended R.J. Reynolds High School. There were 3 school districts that agreed to send a few Negroes at the time to all white schools. Those districts were Charlotte, Greensboro, and Winston-Salem. She's accompanied by Velma Hopkins, and it is a national sensation because this gentleman here is from Time and Life magazine. You also see a service worker. He's a student at Reynolds, and he is trying to remove the racial slurs that were scrolled across the pavement, hoping that Gwendolyn would see those remarks as she made her entrance to school. And then we navigate on to 1958. These adorable children are Kenneth Cooper, his sister Rosalind, and Norma Corley. This is the article, First Negro Students at Easton Elementary. And with a click, visitors can spend a minute with our very own trailblazer, Ms. Corley.
2 girls and a boy. The girls were in the 2nd grade. Ricky, the boy, was in 4th grade. We had this experience. I found out later that so many whites were taken out of the school by their parents that they had to run 2 shifts at Forest Park.
And the wonderful aspect is that you can go back and revisit as you go through time. Most of these snippets are about 1 minute to 3 minutes. So it's a great opportunity to hear a little initially and then to hear more. We've included this article about Gwendolyn Bailey as she graduates from Reynolds because it provides great insight into what it was like to be the only one or the lone, quote, Negro, and the sacrifice that it caused in terms of one's socialization. For example, the article notes that she couldn't attend the junior prom because she would not have had someone in her neighborhood to accompany her. It would have been lonely for her if she tried to go to many of the activities, and she couldn't go to Crystal Lake where the picnic was being held because that was a segregated facility. On to the 1960s. Again, the collages generally start with some notation about a person who was a trailblazer. And in this case, it is Dr. Lillian Lewis, who's the first Negro Forsyth County School Board member. There's ongoing resistance during this time. There's a white citizens council that met at the Forsyth courthouse, and they noted that their goals were to reverse Black Monday. That was a term used for the Brown decision. And they also spoke about the need to preserve the rights of white people. So there was ongoing resistance regarding the decision. There were also biracial committees that met to outline goals for the city in terms of economic development as well as education.
And Anita, I wonder if you want to show, because I know we're limited on time, if you want to show one of your favorite parts of the website, because we're going to send this out to everyone on the call, and it's going to take you a long time to get through it because there's so much rich information. So I wonder if you want to share something that's your favorite.
Yes, I'm going to just spend a little bit of time here, and then I'll just click through to the end. Thank you. So we have the civil rights legislation, and we've noted that because this is when the U.S. Secretary of Education can collect data on the progress or the lack thereof regarding Brown versus Board of Education. And so you can see along each decade, it's laced with articles, and you simply click to choose. The 90s I chose as a very important decade as well. Because it gives us quite a bit of information about Atkins High School and the work of the legacy rather of Dr. Simon G. Atkins, the namesake for Atkins School. This school is so important because it's a Rosenwald school, and that came about because of the work of Booker T. Washington, who was a Tuskegee Institute, the Tuskegee Institute president, and Rosenwald was the president of Sears, Roebuck and Company. This school is so important not only because of the structure and the fact that it was created to serve African Americans, because many of those schools during that time catered to curriculum that just trained African Americans for work that would have been trade only occupations. However, this school allowed for college prep classes in the arts and also in language. It's one of our first cheerleaders. in Community Voices, we note that there are many stories that will never be told, many voices that will never be heard. However, we are appreciative of those individuals who came forth to share their stories. And we invite you to spend time with those who live the experience of desegregation and integration in Winston-Salem. Despite unfair and sometimes disturbing situations, many early trailblazers have continued to advocate for equity through their roles in education, government, and community organizations. They are gifted, compassionate, hardworking citizens who have improved our city and school system. Other community voices are also saluted for their vigilant efforts to foster collaboration by using their insight to help address ongoing issues and controversies. So again, throughout the website, we have community voices, and this page is an opportunity to just listen without the text to their stories and their contributions to our city. And I also would like to say, we are also thankful for the young people who are also on the website, and they tell us about schooling and what it's like for them. And we salute them too, because they remind us that it's young people who also help to change our world. And at the very end, individuals can participate by going to the Memories tab and responding to a question of their choice. Thank you again. I'm sorry if I used my 10 minutes. I tried to keep it within
You're
10
great,
minutes.
Anita. No, this is so much information, like we said, and it's such an incredible site. I know Shamika put a link in the chat, and we'll also be sending a follow-up email to everybody on this call and who registered with this website. And so please, one of the actions you can take after today is visiting that website. And Anita, you mentioned this, the exhibit really took time and was really intentional in getting those community voices there. And one of those was youth. And so we wanted to make sure we mirrored that in our event today. And so we're going to show a interview that I did with one of our youth grant makers in action, Grace, who's also on this call. And we'll get ready to cue that up. Thanks again, Anita.
Well, Grace, we're so happy to have you a part of this event today. So why don't you start by telling everybody your name and what school you go to?
Hey guys, my name is Grace Isibuzo, and I go to school at Early College of Forsyth.
Great. And so, you know, we just saw the Rooted in Race exhibit, which is phenomenal, and just so happy that you're a part of that, as well as Youth Grant Makers in Action. And so we were just wondering if you could kind of talk to us today about why you decided to be a part of the Rooted in Race exhibit and what you would like people to take away from that exhibit.
Okay. Firstly, why I participated in the Rooted in Race exhibit is because I saw this as an opportunity as a youth to speak out what I believe in and what I see that happens and how I am being affected or impacted. As a youth in a community in my school, what issues happening, I knew that from doing this, I could start up a change and let people know how I feel, and I could be an example to my youth also, like people of my age, and they could also be able to start up and to voice out what they feel and how they want the change in the environment and schools they live in and go to.
That's great. And I get to say I've been witnessing that firsthand with you being a part of YGA. So, and so what do you hope people will get from looking at the exhibit?
Firstly, what I will hope people would get is, firstly, wow, you know, these are young girls, young youth in the community that makes up the community, and how they are able, the chance and the privilege they're given to be able to talk about their own perspective and opinion on what they see, what they get from the community, and how they can, and how like they feel, so that people would know that, oh, I have to make this change so that it will be a better environment for the youth to live in.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Grace, because that's one of the things I know I personally love about the exhibit is that it was really intentional in bringing student voice to the room. When, we've talked a lot about in YG, that's not always the case. Even when we're talking about education, the adults are over here talking, but we're not hearing from students like you. So that's a
Right.
great point. And it really helps inform us as adults what actions we should take. So what do you personally think, our community should be focused on when it comes to equity issues in our schools? And what do you think would have the most impact on students?
What I want the community to be focused on is mainly the youth, because as a young person and a youth in the community, we are always said to be the future. We are gonna be here to build up what was left from the older ones and the adults. So I feel like the main thing that the community should focus on is how we feel, how the youth feels, and what do they know. Have a session. What do you think can be done to get this to work? If you're having troubles, what are your troubles? How can we help you? And how can we build you up for you to be able to help others and able to bring others to like say something about how they feel? Because what I see from my perspective is that most people are scared to ask someone for help. Maybe they don't like what's going on. They don't like how they're being treated. Sorry. They could be comfortable to ask anyone in the community, teachers or principal, school advisor, or anyone that, oh, I have this issue and I want it fixed. Because our voices are of great significance and value, because tomorrow we're gonna be the one to lead. So we have to know what we're dealing with, and we have to know how to do it.
That's great. I know I cannot wait for that day, Grace. You're going to be one of those amazing leaders. I just know it. So what are some actions you hope people will take after being on this call? And, really tell us, we as adults, how can we best support our youth in our community?
So what I want us to take out from this event is, firstly, what the issue is, and ways that we've all contributed, and to ask or to view the point of view we've seen, and to match it up with ours, and how do we feel, and so that we know that we are in the right mindsets, and we are like together, so that we at least that's the first thing we have to get, is to be together in mind, and know we're in one mindset, and we know one goal we want to achieve, and that we can from there get our answers, or start to get our answers. And can you repeat the second question? Sorry.
Yeah, just, how can there's lots of adults on this call. I mean, I hope that there's some of your peers on here as well. But how can we specifically as adults really support youth and students in our community?
Mainly I want where there can be sources, or like I don't know how to call this, but like ways that we can be able to open up so we don't feel like we're not heard, and so that we know that, oh, that I tell this adult my situation, I can get it done right away. I can get that situation done so that I can feel safe, because we want safe environments. What have been going on lately is like so terrible, because it's we, the youth and young kids that are being affected. So we want that when we say, okay, this situation have to go away because we are being affected, and it's keeping us uneasy in our environments and keeping us on edge, and we can't walk on the streets, or we can't go out because we are too scared or afraid. So with that being said, we want that something will be done right away from the adults, because we're still young. So the only thing we can do is speak out what we see and what we know, so the adults can help us, take us, talk to a group of us to tell us how do we feel, and then by that doing something about it, not just saying, oh, okay, we're going to do something, but actually like really doing something about it.
Yeah, Grace, that those are such powerful words. And, basically what I'm hearing from you is, of course, we know you're only one voice right
Yeah.
now. And there are so many other youth and students in our community that we need to make sure we're listening to, and that we really link arms and come up with that vision you talked about together, and that we as the adults are really hearing you as the students who are directly impacted by these issues before we go off and take action, so that it's informed, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation, and cannot express how grateful we are to have you as part of Youth Grantmakers in Action, as a part of this incredible exhibit, and as a part of the event tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, we thank Grace again for being a part of our event tonight, and can't think of a better way to go into our next segment. And so our final segment, before we get into some breakout rooms at the end and have some deeper discussion, we have incredible representatives from the Bridges Collaborative, as well as our local school district here, to talk to you about their work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Stefan.
Thank you so much, Tree, and it's really great to be here. And I'm going to put myself on a timer, because without that, we'll be here all night, and I don't want that for any of us. I'm going to share my screen and just introduce this next segment, and then because time is limited, just sort of take it away. So I am Stefan Lallinger. I'm the director of the Bridges Collaborative, which is a national nonprofit that works with school districts and housing organizations from across the country who are interested in promoting equity in student assignment, and in particular. And we'll talk a little bit about what exactly that means and why that's so important. But the Winston-Salem Forsyth County public school system is actually a member of the Bridges Collaborative, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done together, and of the partnership that we've built. I've gotten to know Dr. McMillan and Dr. Roseborough, who are both going to be part of this presentation very well as a result of this. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to spend just about 5 minutes talking a little bit about giving some context for the equity work that we're talking about specifically today, related to things like segregation, related to things like student assignment, related to things like choice plans. And then I'm going to talk about what can be done in terms of addressing some of the things that are plaguing not just Winston-Salem and Forsyth County, but also school districts all across the country. Then I'm going to hand it over to my fantastic colleagues from the district, who are going to make this much more specific to what's happening locally. So I'm going to take more of a national view and a little bit of a around North Carolina view, and then I'm going to hand it off, and we're going to focus very specifically on what's happening here. I want to say I'm a local guy. I'm a proud product of Chapel Hill Carborough Public Schools, so just an hour east of you on I-40 is where I grew up. And I spent most of my career as a teacher and as a principal. And that's the lens through which I see a lot of these issues. But now I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Bridges Collaborative, where I get to interact with districts all across the country who are trying to figure out how to address segregation in ways that are contemporary ways that make sense in 2022. So let's ground ourselves in just a little bit of information. And I think just to piggyback off the Rooted in Race exhibit, which looks like it's just a fantastic exhibit. I really hope everyone goes and checks it out. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on the history, just because time is limited, but know that everything here is intimately linked with everything that was shared before. But I want to talk about today. So let's just take a national view of the landscape today and talk about, people talk about segregation as a historical phenomenon a lot. And it's really important that when we're having this conversation tonight, we're not making that mistake. Segregation is alive and well in the United States. And I want to just share a few statistics about exactly how alive and how well it is. So if we look at all of the public schools in America today, 18.2% of public schools in the US have almost no white students in them. So to put that in context, it's about 1 in every 5 schools, just about 1 in every 5 schools. And then another 16% of American schools have almost no students of color. So it's about 1 in 6 schools. If you add those numbers together, 1 in every 3 public schools in America is highly segregated by race. What do I mean when I say highly segregated? What I mean is the student body is 90 to 100% between, and it could fall anywhere on that spectrum, either 90 to 100% white or 90 to 100% Black and Latino. In the midst of unprecedented diversity in this country. So we're at a point where for the first time in history, if you just look at public K-12 students in the United States, white students are not a majority. And so if you have that kind of diversity, there's really no reason why you should have such hyper segregation in public schools. The unfortunate part about this statistic is that this is actually getting worse. So I want to share a little bit of longitudinal data, not going back too far. I'm just going back to 1988. And now I'm just looking at the percentage of schools where 90 to 100% of the students are non-white. That was just right about 6% in 1988. And then we go about 15 years later and we jump up to 14.8. And then we get to 2011. And I think the 2006 number is actually a typo there. I think that should be closer to 15 in the 15. We get to 2011 and we're at 16.7%. And then 2016 and we're up to 18%. So I share this just to share, we're not headed in the right direction. We're going in the wrong direction, even as America is getting more diverse. And our students are getting more diverse. Our schools are getting more segregated along lines of race. So the question, is why is that? The historical question is, how did we sort of get to the place that we're in? And to answer that in a very concise manner, I mean, I teach a graduate level course on this, so we could spend, the next 14 weeks, 2 hours a day talking about this. But I want to, in short, we all know about Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. And just to sort of build off of the previous presentation, a little bit of a personal connection for me. So these are the lawyers who were in Brown versus Board. You may recognize fourth from the left is Thurgood Marshall there. Well, standing next to Thurgood Marshall to his left, so the third from the right here, is Lewis Redding, and that's my grandfather. So my grandfather was the lawyer who brought the cases in Delaware that became part of Brown, and so he was part of the legal team in 1954, who won probably the most famous Supreme Court case in all of American history. And the reason I tell that story is because 6 decades after he won that court case to supposedly, ensure that our schools are diverse and integrated, I became a principal. And I became the principal of a school in New Orleans where 99% of my students identified as African-American, 96% qualified for free and reduced lunch. So I was the principal of what was functionally a segregated school 6 decades after we had supposedly settled this issue. And the reason I bring that up and say that is because I think for most people, most folks who don't pay attention to these things, they think just that this is a settled issue. It's not something that matters anymore. We don't need to talk about it. But nothing could be further from the truth. There's been a backward slide specifically since the late 1980s. And that gets to this graph that I just showed a couple of slides ago, specifically showing, and I don't want to sort of overcomplicate things, but essentially the higher you get on this graph, this is a black-white exposure index, the higher you get on this graph, the more it indicates that Black students and white students are exposed to one another in schools, meaning there is less segregation. So you see, after 1954, Brown versus Board, we were actually making a good amount of progress as a country. That progress, the apex of that progress was in 1988, in the late 80s. And then since then, it has been a backward slide to the point where our schools along lines of race are as segregated as they were at any time since the late 1960s, when that progress really started to kick off with the, with mandated court desegregation. So why the backsliding? Well, there's a number of different answers to it, but I think the biggest and most important one is there were a number of court cases following Brown in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that essentially let school districts off the hook. So whereas there were mandatory desegregation court orders put into place in many districts across the country, including in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, once school districts were allowed to be declared unitary, they achieved unitary status, they were essentially let off the hook. And many districts moved to what they called a choice model, which essentially ushered in the era of resegregation. And I'm going to let our local experts talk specifically about the context now. But you should know that what's happened in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County is part and parcel of what has happened all across the country. So speaking of, I did a little bit of research, not too extensive, but I wanted to make this very, relevant to local folks. This is pre-pandemic data. So I do want to make that caveat because I wanted, since the pandemic, there have been changes in assessment and reliability of data, and your population has shifted a little bit. But pre-pandemic, and these numbers aren't going to be too far off today, whereas you have an enviably diverse school district, meaning you've got a really beautiful mix of different student populations if we look along lines of race. We see some of the similar patterns in this school district that we see across the country. And so just to give a quick overview, and I have some of the school names listed on the following slides, but because of time, I'm not going to get that detailed. I'm always happy to follow up with anyone who wants more information. But you have about 6 schools where 90% or more of the student body is white. If we reduce that threshold to 70% white, which again, really in a school district where 43% of the students are white, we really shouldn't have that many schools. That increases to 14 schools. If we look at the other way of looking at that statistic is Black and Latino students, there are 10 schools where greater than 90% of the population are Black and Latino. And if we reduce that threshold to 70, we're up to 24 schools. I do want to call out positives. There are 7 schools that I would call racially representative, which means they're within 10 percentage points on all of the primary, specifically looking at Latino, Black, white, certainly not to discount Asian or 2 or more or Native populations, but in terms of if you're going to use a threshold of 10 plus, it makes sense to look at the 3 largest groups. And then if we think about just socioeconomic status, economically disadvantaged, there are 11 schools that are greater than 70% of the student body is economically disadvantaged. Now, so again, I said I did the research to look at which schools these were. This will mean more to you than it does to me because I'm not local. But what I did want to note is on this list of schools that are racially representative, they're all B or C schools with just 2 exceptions, which I've noted here. Then if we look at the schools with greater than 90% white student enrollment, these are all A, B, or C schools with the exception of an alternative rating. If we look at the 10 schools that have greater than 90% Black and Latino students, all of the schools on the list have a D or an F or an alt rating. And there are only 3 schools on this list where the economically disadvantaged population is not greater than 70%. So you see a high correlation. And I'm going to come back to that in just a second. The question I want us to anchor on before I talk about what we can do about this is, why does racial segregation even matter? And does it even matter? Because I talk to folks all around the country on this question, and there are a wide variety of views. There are some people who say in 2022, it doesn't really matter if we have all Black schools. It doesn't really matter if we have all white schools, as long as they're meeting the needs of students. And that second piece, as long as they are meeting the needs of students, is a really important caveat to that question. And so I would posit a couple of things in answering this question. One is racial segregation matters because resources in this country still get allocated differently for racial groups. They still do. As much as we think that we are in a place where there's, what some people would deem colorblind policy, we know that resources still disproportionately flow to white communities. And don't just take my word for it. There was a report that came out in 2019 from EdBuild that demonstrated a $23 billion with a B dollar resource gap between predominantly non-white school districts and white school districts. This is at the school district level. We could drill down to the school level. And when I talk about resources, we shouldn't limit ourselves just to talking about dollars. We should think about infrastructure. We should think about teacher quality. We should think about curriculum. We should think about everything that counts in terms of the kinds of resources that matter when it comes to how students perform. The second reason why we should care about racial segregation in 2022 is because in 2022, racial segregation concentrates Black and Latino students in high poverty schools. This is extremely important because there is tons of research around the impact that high poverty schools have on students. So concentrations of Black and Latino students in high poverty schools specifically leads to dramatically larger achievement gaps. And to make this come to life a little bit, this is not just Winston-Salem, this is the entire country. This is the distribution of all white students in this country and the distribution of all Black students in this country. And the different categories is the level of poverty of each of the schools. So on your far left, you've got low poverty schools. So you can see that almost a third of all white students in this country attend low poverty schools. Only 10% of Black students can say the same. Now, if we look at mid low poverty and mid high poverty schools, again, the vast majority of white students fall in these categories. And then look at the far right. These are high poverty schools in this country. Only about 6% of white students in the entire United States attend high poverty schools, whereas we're nearing the almost 50% mark. We're at about 43% of all Black students attend a high poverty school. So racial segregation matters because it concentrates Black and Latino students in high poverty schools. And we know that matters because high poverty schools have dramatically worse outcomes for students, not just on academic measures, but on all sorts of non-academic measures. So whatever your feelings on whether or not school integration is the answer to this issue, you need to be acutely aware of the harmful effects that segregation has along lines of race and why that specifically matters. To bring it back to Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, just again, of the 11 schools where the student population is greater than 70% economically disadvantaged, there are only 3 schools that are not greater than 90% Black or Latino. So again, that correlation. All the schools on this list have a D or an F or an alt rating. So we see the correlation, we see the trend in what we were just talking about from the research and the national data. Now, this is particularly important because there's been a lot of research done recently about, and not even just recently, in the last few decades, about the impact that integration has on student achievement. And I want to pause for a second because people have wildly different understandings of what integration might mean. And at the Bridges Collaborative, we spend a lot of time talking about the fact that simple desegregation is not the same thing as integration. Because see, desegregation just means you remove the barriers and you enable students to go to school together. But desegregation doesn't take care to ensure that, for instance, if you're a student of color, you're not entering a hostile environment, or if you're a student of color, you're not all of a sudden being exposed to curriculum that doesn't reflect you or reflect accurately on your own history, or that you don't have any contact with teachers or leaders who look like you. See, those are the kinds of things that, by and large, desegregation in the 60s and 70s did not pay attention to. And we know the long history of Black educators that were adversely impacted when schools were desegregated. Many of them were fired, right, without cause. We know that many, from hearing from our parents' generation, and for some of us who are younger in the audience, not me, because for me it was my parents' generation, but for some of you, your grandparents' generation, that when schools were desegregated, Black students often faced hostile environments when they attended these schools. And so it's just really important that if we're looking at integration as a solution, we're thinking about integration in a holistic sense, in terms of bringing communities together in ways that value all of the members who come to the community, in ways that ensure that there's representation for teachers and for leaders, that there are practices that happen within the school that don't lead to in-school segregation, that all students have access to high quality and rigorous instruction and academics, that there aren't disproportionate outcomes in terms of discipline. These are the things that are important to pay attention to. And when those things are done right, all students thrive. And students, there's a common misconception that high-performing students are disadvantaged in an integrated environment. And that's been disproven in the research. Because of time, I'm not going to go through all of these things, but these are a whole host of both academic and non-academic outcomes that are correlated with integrated school settings. The question of what can be done as I wind down my time here, just a few minutes left, and I want to make sure I stick to time. Because I'm not going to be able to do this section justice, I want to again invite anyone to follow up with me. I'm happy to send you resources or further information. But the key question about what can be done really comes down to how can we address the fact that we are segregated in where we live in this country. This is a racial density dot map of North Carolina, not just Winston-Salem, Forsyth, but some of the surrounding communities. And you can see in almost every major metropolitan area in North Carolina, you see, so the white dots here represent African-American residents. The beige dots represent white residents. And what you can see is in almost every metro area, you have high levels of segregation that are a result of generations of governmental action to specifically force certain communities into certain places. And then if you're in a Black or brown community, specifically disinvest in those communities. This is a close-up look on Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. You can see the segregation levels. It's a little bit hard to see because the colors, I wish the colors contrasted a little bit more, but essentially, as everybody on this call well knows, residential segregation is very high in Winston-Salem. So the question is, what do you do as a school district if you want to address these issues? And one thing that's important to figure out is what is the source of the segregation in your schools? Because in some areas it is, just within the district. In other areas, it's because neighboring districts have been drawn in such a way that foster segregation. In other districts, it has to do with charter schools and private schools and magnet schools. Well, in Winston-Salem, the data show, and by the way, you can go to this map. This is on our website, tcf.org. I'll share this resource afterward. You can type in Winston and you can sort of see. But the data for Winston shows there's two primary drivers of segregation. One is segregation between districts. So surrounding districts look very different than Winston-Salem specifically does. But there's not much, we don't want to go down that rabbit hole on this call. The other major driver is within district segregation. That's about half of the segregation can be attributed to the way that students are assigned within Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. So what I want to spend the last couple of minutes focusing on is, well, what can a district do about these things? What powers do you have? What levers do you have to be able to do anything about this? And there are a number of different things that you can do. Notice busing is not on here for a lot of reasons, politically and otherwise. We'll leave that to the side for a second. That is something that you could do, but we've sort of left that in the past, both here in Winston and in other places, as just a standalone strategy. But a couple of things. You could draw better school zones. And I have a couple of examples on the following slides that I'm not going to get into today. But you can always draw better school zones and draw them with distance in mind. So even in highly segregated communities, there are always ways to draw better school zones that maximize both racial and socioeconomic diversity, while also taking into account the fact that you don't want people spending 40 minutes to an hour on transportation. So you could draw better school zones. Obviously there you're limited by some geographical constraints, as you are in Winston. You can think about district-wide choice policies. Now, unfettered choice leads to more segregation. We know that, we've seen that in New Orleans as an example. If you just have choice with no guardrails, no underlying algorithms that both take people's choice into account, but then also ensure that they're trying to make sure all of the schools are within a certain range of diversity, then you lead to more segregation. So choice with guardrails, such as in Cambridge Public Schools in Massachusetts, leads to a situation where, in the example I show in Cambridge, is all of their schools are within 10 percentage points of their both racial and socioeconomic makeup of the broader community. Other things that you can do, you can think about priorities, weighted lotteries, multiple lotteries. San Antonio and Dallas, for instance, have really led the way on this way of essentially using multiple lotteries to ensure diversity at some of their what they call innovation and transformation schools. Really fascinating way to increase diversity and also offer parents innovating and exciting choices. You can implement choice within zones. I understand that that's part of the current model in Winston-Salem, but in Berkeley, they did it with special attention to trying to make sure that there was diversity within the zone. So you have to draw the zones in such a way, and the map of Berkeley shows neatly, it sort of cross cuts across communities in ways that also minimize distance traveled. But so parents have the choice of 3 or 4 schools within their zone, and they've got a lottery that they run that ensures that all of the schools in that zone have similar to overall demographic makeups. And then there's strategic merger of schools, which has been done in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, locally, and also in New York City. So I'm going to stop there, but just to sort of give you the example, like I have details about how all of these plans work. This is a map of Cambridge. This is an example of how the multiple lottery mechanism works. This is a picture of Berkeley and how they do their zones and choice within zones. On the left side, you have their actual attendance zones. On the right side, you just have a map of the varying levels of socioeconomic and racial diversity in Berkeley. So they drew their zones with regard to geography and with regard to demographics to make sure that they could have, a diverse set of students within each of their zones. And so, in short, I'm not going to go down that path, but I'm happy to give folks more information. I just wanted to lay the sort of groundwork for this is the context for why this matters. This is what's happening across the country. Many of our Bridges members are engaged in. These are the things that are possible in a very sort of contemporary 2022 way of thinking about this issue. And just to raise awareness about the fact that although it's not talked about in many quarters, although probably a lot of folks on this call are more aware than your average citizen, segregation is alive and well in 2022. It has really deleterious and negative impacts, particularly on students of color, and particularly for the reason that students of color are segregated in high poverty schools. And there are things that we can do about it. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to pass this to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Karen Roseborough, and I will handle the slide. So you can just say next slide when you're ready.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. And of course, I feel like I'm among family, so it's good to see many of you all on the call today. I am Dr. Karen Roseborough, and I am the Chief Officer for Choice and Magnet Schools. This is the first time we've had this type of position in our district. But most importantly, I feel like the work that I'm doing now has come full circle because I am a product of the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School District. And in 1995, I served as the student on the Student Superintendent Advisory Committee that looked at the plans for redistricting our school district. And at that time, I was very vocal about our plans to move towards a school choice model. And now back as an adult serving the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, I've come to the work not only from a personal and professional level, but also I am now a parent in the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School District. So I'm just very passionate to be able to share with you some of the work that's happening and how the work is slowly evolving. But we do see some opportunity for great change, especially as we have our partners with the Bridges Collaborative helping us to guide the way and showing us the appropriate way of messaging some of this information to our community. So we can go to the first slide. So some of the work that we did first in the newly formed Office of Choice and Magnet Schools is we had to have a definition in terms of what our purpose was as an office and what do we feel most passionate about. And so we rallied around our Office of Equity with Dr. McMillan, as well as with our school board to say what are our common beliefs about school choice in Winston-Salem Forsyth County. And so this mission statement is aligned to our mission statement as a district, that we're committed to providing high quality and engaging school choice options for every student in every zip code, that they will graduate with the interpersonal, academic, and workforce skills they need to compete in a global society. And school choice in WSFCS is very unique. It's not like any other system in North Carolina, in that our families, they can choose from their residential schools, zone schools, and magnet schools. And this is what makes us unique. This is what makes the choice plan that we have here attractive to folks that move into our community. But still, there's lots of work that needs to be done, although we are offering all of these choices for families. We have yet to evolve since 1995 when the plan was first enacted. So to give you some historical context, that in 1995, our school board approved our school choice plan, and it was developed as part of the voluntary desegregation plan. The school choice plan is a controlled choice plan where it allows our families to choose from a few schools in their residential attendance zone, and transportation is provided. The students may choose a school outside of their school zone, however, they must provide their own transportation. The zones were organized, and they still are, into geographical zones, with students living in a zone could choose from those schools located in their zone. Our elementary school students can choose up to 3 schools. Our middle school students can choose up to 2 schools, and our high school students can choose to do a choice transfer, but they must provide their own transportation to their high school of choice. We can go to the next one. WSFCS in the early 2000s decided to implement a district-wide magnet program that would address the minority isolation. The community became very concerned about minority isolation. And so a response to that was to develop a magnet school plan that we would provide transportation outside of residential zones. The transportation process is a model in which our students must get to a magnet hub. So they must get to the magnet school express stop to be transported on to a magnet school outside of their zone. So we began a robust campaign to attract socioeconomic and racially diverse students to low performing schools, to increase public school choice options, offering specialized programs based off of student interest, college, and career aspirations. And we are currently offering approximately 23 magnet programs here in the district. The federal code regarding magnet schools is something that I wanted to highlight during this presentation, because somehow all along the way, our community shifted its definition of what a magnet school truly is. And so we wanted to make sure that folks in our community understand what they are for and what the purpose of them are for. They are for making sure that they are attracting capable students in substantial numbers of different racial backgrounds. Is to bring students from a variety of backgrounds together to take part in a specialized curriculum. So on this particular slide, we have the definition of what magnet schools are, and that they do provide specialized programming. They collaborate. There's high levels of collaboration, and it's to offer our families something different from the status quo of traditional schooling. And it does require the district to provide a lot of resources. It is application-based, and it is ran through a lottery. Students are accepted based off of a lottery and the number of seats available. And even within our choice plan, where students are able to choose another school inside their residential zone, we're only able to offer those seats if space is available. And I would say in the early and late 2000s, we kind of got away from building capacities. And so we saw a large number of modular units go up to provide space at not only our magnet schools, but our choice schools. So we are slowly evolving in actually applying caps so that we can offer the seats in which the school can really accommodate. Go to the next slide. So our promise and practices is that, as you know, we are a member of the Bridges Collaborative. And during our time with the Bridges Collaborative, we are learning more about student assignment strategies to improve our current student assignment policy to be more equitable, where it promotes diversity. We want to maximize integration and to be more inclusive using the data and information that we're learning about magnet school programming and redistricting of zones. WSFCS has engaged with diverse groups across the district with divergent views regarding school choice to gather feedback from families, students, and community members like yourselves. So today, our presentation is more about giving you the information and the facts about where we currently are, but we want to get some of your feedback on how we should continuously be evolving school choice in our district. Revisions to our current student assignment policy was recently done in alignment to our equity policy 1100. If you want to see some of the changes in our student assignment policy that we are proposing, you can click on the link within the presentation. One of the things that we have done in the current proposed policy change is we specifically call out that we want to maximize racial and socioeconomic integration into our schools. That's something that we want to start intentionally looking at, reviewing, and then coming up with some practices that will lend itself to be more equitable and intentional in regards to our magnet school programming and our choice school programming. WSFCS, we're piloting software. This is the first time that we've used a software system to help with our lotteries. So we're going to be training our principals and our magnet coordinators in late September and October. And our parents asked for us to create a more transparent and efficient system for school choice where they can get the information in real time on their phones. And we were able to pilot this program during our kindergarten choice period. But next year, we're hoping to go full blast with grades K through 12. We've also done some work with a group called the Cooperative Strategies, who has looked at our magnet school programs and has helped us to identify what is accessible and sustainable and what's popular among families. So we've created some pathways on our most viable choice options in the district, which are visual and performing arts, international baccalaureate, STEM and STEAM, and dual language. And we were able this year for the first time to get additional teaching allotments for magnet coordinators to make them full time so that we can devote our attention to our recruitment and retention efforts of rebranding and marketing the magnet pathways so that families are not just following perception of school, but they will begin to follow programming, which is, again, the true premise of magnet schools. We can go to the next slide. So this is an example of our magnet school pathways. And I want you to really pay attention to the end. We're going to start with the beginning and the end in mind. So if you look at the top, our premier high schools here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County is Atkins High School and Reynolds High School. They are our premier magnet high schools. This is where we have the longest wait list. So one of the things that Cooperative Strategies helped us to do was to map out a K-12 continuum so that our students can not only be competitive at the end of high school, but in college to be able to demonstrate that they've had this K-12 continuum in a field of study. So I selected the STEM and STEAM pathway to just show you that Moore and Bronson Elementary School, which are two Title I elementary schools, and they are diverse. If you recall on one of the slides that Stefan showed, he showed Bronson Elementary as one of those schools. And as you move up in that preference pathway, you receive preference to go to either Haynes STEM or Wiley STEAM. And then Philo Hill Magnet will also be a STEAM because Philo Hill services the southwest area of Winston-Salem. So some of our students that reside right along the lines between Clemens and Winston-Salem should be attending Philo Hill Magnet School. And we're putting special attention and care on the rebranding and the refocusing of the magnet program at Philo Hill. All of these students will get preference into the Atkins High School or into Reynolds High School through our lottery process. So if they start in the K-12 continuum and continue on, they will get that preference priority come lottery time and choice application process. We can go to the next slide. So our evolution of school choice in WSFCS is that research shows that when students go to school with people from all kinds of different backgrounds, that they are better and well-rounded. They have a more better and well-rounded education. Not only do they learn understanding and empathy for people from all walks of life, they also are better prepared to live and work in an increasingly diverse society. But despite WSFC's best efforts to expand school choice options, the intent was to increase socioeconomic and racial diversity. Much restructuring, dedicated resources are needed to provide district-wide, high-quality learning environments in every zip code for our students. Additionally, our families have voluntarily elected to choose schools that are in close proximity to their neighborhoods. What are the benefits of our current WSFCS school choice plan? That's some of the questions that we ask in our office. And then what are some of the barriers of the WSFCS school choice plan? And how do we overcome these barriers to create more equitable school choice in our local community? Because we know that our families, they love school choice. Our families have spoken. If they start at a school, they usually stay at that school. But every year, our office sees over 4,000 choice applications come in. African American families make up the highest number of choice applications in our school district, followed by white families, and then followed by Hispanic families. Research and within our office shows that once our Hispanic families understand the process of school choice, they start to participate in greater numbers as well. We see the largest number of applications to come in at the elementary and at the high school level. Our middle school it fluctuates from year to year because of the number of middle schools that we currently have. We're over capacity at the middle school level across the district, but that's where we see smaller numbers in choice. Usually families leave for Forsyth County Public School System, middle school level, to go to other choice options, and then they come back in for high school. So I'm going to turn it over to Effie, and she's going to tell you a little bit about our equity efforts.
Good evening, all. I am very much aware of time and want to give opportunity for you to ask questions and have some questions answered. But in addition to the work that has already been described, first of all, I will say that our partnership with the Bridges Collaborative has been phenomenal. I began with Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools near the end of 2019 in the first established Office of Equity, Access, and Acceleration. And since I've started, there's been a lot of work that has been happening, in part to our equity policy that was passed in 2020. And in 2020, that was also the time at which our strategic plan was being developed. I'm really excited to say that our strategic plan is a very robust and comprehensive plan that has equity woven through all 5 goals that exist. What I've called out here is specifically equity efforts for around goal 2, which really is centered around giving greater access to our students so that they have a quality education and we can fulfill the mission and vision of our district. So some of those things are included in terms of access to more rigorous courses and acceleration. As you heard Dr. Lallinger say earlier, we have great segregation across our district in terms of schools. Also, when I think about our schools in terms of, and I think somebody put it in the chat, when we look at the school as a whole, the school on paper may look very diverse. It has diverse representation. However, when you walk through the halls and look inside the classrooms, you also see segregation that is happening within the classrooms. Many of our students have called it out and asked specifically, what are you going to do to change that, so that our advanced placement courses reflect more of the demographics of the district. And so we have made some concerted efforts to develop plans and work towards looking at what barriers are in place and working to remove those barriers so that our students who have not been represented in those higher level courses have an opportunity and are encouraged to participate and really thrive in those spaces. Another huge work that we have been doing over the past year, and some of you on this call have been a part of this effort, is really revising our discipline code. It was initially called Student Code of Conduct. The revised one is called the Code of Character, Conduct, and Support. And as our student Grace was speaking, and she talked about what is needed for students, one of the things that made me really excited about what she said was that it's important for youth today to know how to get help, but also how to help others, and to say something when things come up that are not right in the community so support can be provided. And that's one of the things that is very intentional about our new code. Not only is it just about rules and consequences, but it's about restorative interventions and the support that our students need so that they can be successful in our school spaces, and so that we are creating those welcoming and inclusive spaces that we desire for them to have and that they so deserve. A couple of other things that I just want to point out for you, as you can see on the screen, our objective C is around our disproportionate identification of students as having a serious emotional disability. That has greatly impacted Black males. That is who is disproportionately identified. And we have been on the significant disproportionate list for the state of North Carolina for the past couple of years. Proud to say that this year we were taken off the significant disproportionate list. However, we're still on the watch list. So that says that many of the efforts we have been implementing is working, but we still have work to do. Last couple of things that I will say in terms of just the work that is happening. There's a lot of work that is happening to really advance equity and to change outcomes for our students that have not thrived well in our system. That includes the development around cultural competency for teachers and our leaders. And we've really been focused in on our leaders, and through our partnership with the Wallace Foundation, we are developing pipelines for leaders to not only be in our schools, but that they are culturally competent and they're equity-centered leaders, so that they have those skills and those competencies that are necessary to really make transformative change within our schools. And we know all of this work can't happen without professional learning, without policy and practice changes across the district, without increased communication and partnering with students, families, and community. And so I appreciate the support of the community and all of the efforts, the advocacy to really create and move us forward in a direction that's really going to benefit all of the students that we serve. So with that, I will turn it back over to Andrea Houlihan for our next steps.
Great. Thank you all so much.